For that final to face Jan Nepomniachtchi. The bar is slightly over to his side. It's a must-win situation for Artemiev. Any chances for him?
Yes, it's still early days in this game, only on move 5, and Black already has played something a bit rare, bringing the Black Queen out very early, trying to create a pin towards the White King. And this is known. I've actually played similar ideas myself, but it does involve a bit of risk for Black. And that's what Artemiev needs to do. He must win with Black, and therefore he has to play kind of maybe not the openings he would usually choose. So we see Black grab a pawn in the centre, White's knight going over to attack the Black Queen, kicking it away so that White can recapture in the centre with a pawn. Magnus just wants a solid, symmetrical pawn structure, and that will guide him towards the draw he requires. But Artemiev will try and find ways, if he can, of imbalancing things. It's not going to be easy, though.
It's certainly not going to be easy, especially with the white pawns in the centre. I mean, the most principal idea there is actually to copy for Black. You know, you establish a pawn in centre, Black will also do the same, but then the margin for drawing becomes considerably higher.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Magnus is so good at taking the game into the kind of position he wants to get it into, and he's played this opening not pushing the pawns too far, you could say, to get a very safe position. The bishops, both fianchettoed, very symmetrical there. And I think it's going to be a really hard task for Vladislav to get anything out of this game. You know, in some ways, I'm kind of happy because I want to see Magnus play Jan in the final.
Yeah.
You know, I want to see the repeat there, and obviously that's you know, it's going to be interesting to see how they get on. And I think Jan just playing on instinct there is very understandable, you know, as well. And but still, Jan Magnus is going to be special.
Yeah, and once Black moves the queen out of the way, pawn takes pawn, it's going to be symmetrical pawn structure, and as you mentioned, Simon, it's very, very likely at this point, with the symmetrical pawn structure, Magnus will get the draw, and we'll see that big final.
Yeah.
The dream final.
Yeah, definitely.
And, OK, in this game, 6 moves, and Artemiev is already down to 12 minutes. Why is this a position where they're spending a lot more time? What is it about this position and this opening?
I guess he's just trying to get Magnus out of his comfort zone. Artemiev is not playing the usually recommended moves. Look at that Black Queen on the edge of the board. One thing we teach beginners is don't bring your queen out too early. The queen is the most valuable piece. Anytime she's attacked, it'll be by a lower ranked piece, and she'll have to run away. She'll have to retreat. And already that Black Queen has moved twice. I don't really know what she's doing there. She looks very vulnerable to future threats. And Artemiev, he's just trying to confuse Magnus, maybe. So that's why he's been spending a few minutes on the clock. And I expect to see him do that over the next 5-10 moves as well. It won't be easy for Artemiev to try and find ways to imbalance it. And if he doesn't imbalance things in the next few moves, then Magnus will be super solid and it won't be possible to beat him.
Yeah, he's going to have to take risks, Artemiev. Maybe that involves just perhaps not pushing his queen's pawn two squares forward, maybe not pushing it 1 square forward. But I really don't like the fact that the Black Queen is stuck there on the edge of the board. I mean, she's out there on a limb. What's she doing? And I don't see any possibility for her to kind of comfortably get back into a relevant position.
Yeah. And we mentioned this is a very, very rare opening. Jovanka, has this been played before?
No.
Has this been seen before? No.
No, I mean, it had been seen before up until this unorthodox queen move.
OK, so the first new move already on move 6. Mm-hmm. That's rare. Yeah. I mean, how often do you see a novelty or a brand new position on move 6 at a top-level game?
But that's good. I mean, that's what he needs to do. So he's trying. You know,
yeah.
So it's very hard to try against Magnus. So I mean, it's
especially with Black.
Especially, yeah.
So hard. I mean, yeah.
The only person who managed to unsettle Magnus in this kind of particular situation was actually Wesley So. Everyone else, you know, Magnus has been ruthless in closing down the game, and people have been forced to take ridiculous amount of risks, and of course it's all backfired on them.
Yeah. We should mention Magnus has lost a few games, I think 3 games with White so far in this tournament, but most of them were due to pressing too hard or taking big risks, and in a situation where he only needs a draw, it's going to be hard. It's going to be very difficult to unsettle him. Yeah. We've seen this before. He's been in World Championship matches, for example, against Anand, only needing a draw with White to settle things, and he achieved it. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking here, if I had the white pieces, what do you do with your D pawn? I mean, the most aggressive move is to push it forwards, but I will bet anyone that he won't play that move. Little bet there. Anyone want to take it on? Little cheeky
I'm
one.
not brave enough. I think
no,
you're right.
I think you're right. I would not.
Attack a knight, push it on, get a threat,
Normally,
go aggressive, get some
normally
space.
I might be tempted to do something like that because I love putting my pawns on the d5 square. However, there's no need. There's no need to lengthen the black diagonal of the bishop. I don't need to do that. I can just simply develop a knight, keep the position all kind of solid.
Yeah, and I think it's about control.
Yeah,
about controlling the position, and this is what we're talking that the great players can do. They can decide what position they want and just take it that way. And pushing the pawn on, I mean, I'd probably play that in 90% of the games, you know, without thinking, because I like attacking things and I like getting space. But the more sensible Magnus move here would just be like something like E3, push the pawn to defend that pawn.
Simon.
There you go. And he just played it. So that was good commentators' kind of not curse. What's the opposite of curse?
Blessing?
Yeah. That's
commentator's luck. I don't know.
Yeah, commentator's blessing. So, yeah, I mean, that's much more a Magnus move, though. But just to not give anything for black so far.
And we can explain just why you called that move and why we were not taking your bet, Simon. In this position, the pawn is under fire, and maybe the strongest move, maybe the most natural move, is to push forward, gaining time against this knight, gaining space. But with great space does come great responsibility, and Magnus in a must-draw situation where he only needs the half point, doesn't need to take risks opening up this bishop. Instead, he pushes this pawn forward, as you mentioned, solidifying this rock-solid centre. And not only that, but he's bringing his knight out. We talked about, whoops, not that square. We talked about the queen, sorry. And white's knight is going towards it, almost trapping it already. So, this black queen is going to go on a further journey, a further adventure to try and run away from the white knights. And to me, it's looking very pleasant for white, even if black gets his pieces out. I'm looking at this bishop, this rook. Even if they come into the game, how are you ever going to break down white's rock-solid centre? And white's bishop here is also fantastic on this diagonal, controlling so many squares.
I mean, I would have thought it's very hard to do, but if you're in a must-win situation, the first thing you should try and do is make the pawn structure unsymmetrical, because when it's a symmetrical pawn structure like we have here, they're facing off against each other, there's more likelihood it's going to lead to equal positions. But if you have an unsymmetrical, unbalanced pawn structure, you have a more dynamic game. So that's maybe something that that Vladislav has done wrong at the start of this game. OK, he's played some really weird moves, which is understandable, but actually the pawn structure is not the kind of pawn structure he'd want in a must-win situation.
Yeah, it's hard to achieve any kind of imbalance here, right? Yeah. Even if, for example, you get a pawn structure like this one, white castling, and then black pushing forward, this is complete symmetry. And at the very best, black can hope for a draw, most likely. It's even hard to achieve this, to be honest, even though it might be the best and the most solid kind of continuation. So, yeah, this white knight's just going to move over and attack the black queen and gain even more time for white. There we go. It does happen. After black's castled, the white knight has shuffled across. Black's queen only has one safe square, I think. Has to go back this way. If it goes in this direction, it might get hit by the white bishop at some point, and it might be even more trouble. Actually, you could maybe use this square, but either way, no safety for the black queen yet.
Yeah.
Black is losing so many moves, so many tempi.
Yes, I agree. And well, we're very interested in hearing everyone's chess thoughts. So if you do have a question or chess suggestion, then please do tweet us using the hashtag #ChessChamps, and we'll try and answer them on the show. And talking about questions, Jack Allen has a question for me. He says they love the commentating team. What a tournament question. Question, why does Ivanka refer to ranks and files on the board as rows? And there is a reason I do that, because the chess speak is to refer to the horizontal lines as ranks and the vertical lines as files. But okay, to a beginner who perhaps doesn't know the game, this might be a little bit confusing. So that's why I say rows, because then everyone knows it's a row. And I use the word lines. So it's just to make the game a little bit more accessible. And it's also why we have a lot of expressions and a lot of fun on the show.
And try to stay away from notation, at least when we cannot show on the board, because it can be a little confusing with the notation.
Yeah, I mean, you hear I was about to say you hear lines like lines, you hear words like lines in other sports, so it's just maybe easier for people to understand in general.
Yeah.
And Kaya, I've got a question for you. As you've been on the panel, doing your job, listening to the experts here, have you found your chess play has shot up? Have you been learning a lot?
I have been learning a lot, and what I am noticing is that I'm recognizing patterns so much easier, and I'm also a lot quicker when playing the opening because I just know what to go for. Go for center, go for king safety, and develop my pieces. So I just play faster, and I can maybe recognize a few more openings. Yeah, so definitely, yes, I have gotten a lot better, but I'm still far away from you guys. Yes.
And Simon, there was a famous moment last season when Kaya spotted the best move and we were struggling. I don't think we would have spotted it, and Kaya got it. It's fate.
You guys are doing a great job then of teaching. So that's,
Exactly,
that's,
yeah. Oh,
the key.
favorite moment from last season. Oh, yes.
And meanwhile, Magnus Carlsen, the computer doesn't approve of what he's doing, but it looks very solid to me at least. He's offering a queen trade, and if the queens come off, it looks like full safety for white. Okay, meanwhile, Artemiev finding a sneaky way to allow the queen trade, but at least develop his pieces in the process. So if white goes and plays queen takes queen, capturing the black queen, black's bishop will recapture, and at least it will stand on a great diagonal. Magnus looking very relaxed, though, meanwhile, leaning back in his chair.
Yeah, he's nearly horizontal.
So I have a question for you guys. If you were in Magnus's shoes, would you just trade off queens?
I'm thinking about that. I mean, I'd like to exchange the queens and then get rid of this, move my bishop back or something, I'm thinking. But I'd have to have a concrete reason, because my king's stood in the middle. I have to be a little bit careful with black's knight coming towards my queen side. So I'd think about it. I mean, I wouldn't rush the decision here to capture that queen, personally.
You do mention the big... OK, he hasn't taken it yet, but the big threat in the position will be for black to jump in with a knight, to check on this square or this square, and some real annoyances. So maybe white here would have had to drop a bishop back, but you lose a bit of time. Wow, the evaluation bar shooting up in black's favour.
Yeah.
That is surprising. So in the current position, if we go to it, white didn't go for the queen trade. Maybe he should have done. Instead, just moving his bishop. And has this allowed black an opportunity? Can black, for example... Ooh, I was going to suggest a very risky move, which I don't think works. I was going to say jump in with the knight, but then it does allow white to capture this rook in the corner. I don't think there's enough compensation here for black. What could the downside be? I don't see it, personally. Why is the evaluation bar so excited about black's position? I'm struggling.
Peculiar.
Simon?
No, I can't see it either. Generally, if you can't see it, I can't see it, David. Let's just make that clear. So, but I don't see a problem with this position at all, really. I mean, symmetrical, white's got development. Is it bishop a6 here? Is that the only way?
I think it must be putting that bishop on that diagonal and then...
Stopping the white king from castling, the white king stuck in the centre, having to defend this knight in front of it. Yeah. And actually, maybe no safe squares for this knight either. OK, this has happened on the board. If the white knight jumps this way, as we mentioned, black's knight is going to leap in at some point with some really annoying checks on this square or this square. And instead, Magnus has moved his bishop. But this bishop, it just looks ugly. It looks like a big pawn staring against its own fortified pawn structure there.
But it wasn't a good piece. I mean, I was going to make that point, and that the dark square bishop that white has is kind of a bit trapped by its own pawns, and there wasn't that much of a future for it.
Yeah, I have noticed when analysing similar types of positions from this exact opening, actually, that computers do tend to evaluate this structure very much in black's favour. So usually that's with a pawn in the centre and it's completely symmetrical, but this knight is currently dominated by this pawn. So maybe it will take white just longer to reroute the pieces to get this knight to a better circuit. Also, as mentioned, this white king, how do you get it to safety? It is kind of an endgame, not quite an endgame, because the queens are off, but still this king might come under fire if it stays in the centre for too long. Black has simple plans. Black can centralise the rooks, maybe even try and break out in the centre at some point, just to try and create some imbalance, as you mentioned, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the hardest things of doing chess is to play for a draw, and I imagine a bit different for Magnus because he's had so much experience in this. But historically, if you know you need a draw, and it doesn't matter what colour you are, even if you've got the white pieces, it's really hard to suddenly change and have that in mind. You should actually play for a win, right? If you need to get a draw, you should play your normal stuff and try to actually win the game. I mean, there's been cases where the famous one, Gurovic, with the white pieces in the run-up to an old World Championships match, was playing Nigel Short, and he played the exchange French and just tried to draw, and he lost very convincingly against Nigel Short. And that's, I think, the same series where Nigel Short went on to face Garry Kasparov in the final. So it's kind of challenging to have to play for a draw, especially for someone like me, because I had no idea how to do that in normal chess anyway, and I'd really struggle. But it's Magnus, you know, he can't relax here too much if he wants to get a result. But yeah, I still don't see too many problems with his position, to be honest here. I don't think the computer is. I think the computer's been very optimistic about Vladislav. Wow, look at that! I mean, it's giving Vladislav a major advantage. Why? I think it's. Isn't it being optimistic here? Or
too enthusiastic,
too enthusiastic.
And it kind of links in quite nicely with Hugo Boschman's question, who asks, with the queens off the board, isn't your king meant to be safe in the centre?
Yeah, usually, but here every single other piece is still on the board. And you could imagine maybe a line opening up. For example, if the d file ever opens up, black could push some pawns. White's king, I mean, it looks pretty safe, to be honest, but there is some hint of a potential attack against it, and it might feel vulnerable while the rooks remain, at least. So endgames, you're completely right there, Hugo. Kings in the centre, they tend to be more flexible, and usually that's where you want them, but maybe here it's an exception. Magnus will hope that he can get the rooks off at some point, and then the white king will feel completely safe.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, I think it was in one of John Nunn's books. He calls it, is it an NQE or something like that? It's not quite an endgame because there's still too many pieces left on the board. Okay, meanwhile, look at this. White's knight, I highlighted it as a bad piece because it was dominated by a pawn. Magnus steps it back and he's going to actually plant it in front of his king to act as a defender. So
still looks all right, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it looks solid enough for now, at least for White.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about John Nunn books, did you ever get the book Secrets of Pawnless and Pieceless Endings?
Yeah, it's been a few years since I read it, I must admit, but I did.
No, that was actually a trick. There's pawn.
Oh, it's no.
I said pawnless and pieceless. I was just being silly there because apparently it was an advert. There's one of pieceless endings.
Pieceless endings. That's the one then.
Right,
yeah.
I think it was a joke. Someone.
Oh, pawnless. Okay, yeah. You tricked me with the wording.
Sorry, I had to.
The pieceless one I've read.
I think someone put an advert into one of the magazines and they advertised this book, The Secrets of Pawnless and Pieceless Endings, which is just like an empty board, right? But then loads of people pre-ordered this book. So sorry, David, sorry. It's really... sorry. I'll buy you a drink later, Dave. But no, it's just...
No way, that'll cost you.
You know that on that subject of... there was, I think it was John Nunn. He wrote a book about rook and pawn endings, and it dealt with pawns on the A, B, C, D files. So it would be basically the left side of the board. And a reader wrote in and he goes, this book is a complete con because it didn't cover E, F, G, H, forgetting that, of course, whatever is relevant on the left side is going to be irrelevant on the other side of the board as well.
That's a good point, actually, yeah. I have to say, those books, I know they won awards. I couldn't get my head around them because it was just lines and lines, and I was like, I just can't. They weren't for me. They were great books, obviously, because they got very good reviews, but they weren't for me.
Yeah, you have to be a certain level, I guess, for those books. And there are definitely, I mean, there are books out there. There are video courses which are maybe more wordy with more explanations and maybe more for the general.
Magnus has done one, hasn't he? I mean, for chessball, a course with John Bartholomew, I think, on some great endgame course, which is the fundamentals of endings.
Yeah, the 100 endgames you need
must
to know.
Yeah. That's right. And that is a great book and a great course. Magnus teaching you endings. We've seen how good he is at that. So.
And Magnus stepping up his pawn. And what I like about this move is that this pawn move, it's small, but it does control the squares that the black knight sitting on f6 can
Look
jump
at the computer, though. What's the computer doing today?
Does it?
It's gone psycho. It's like,
it hates White's position, doesn't it?
It's literally saying, I can't. Is it over a pawn advantage? Nearly 2 pawn advantage for black? Is that real? Why? I
mean, black's pieces are all better than white's pieces, but I mean, I hear if you made me guess, I would say maybe 0.5. But then, you're right, Simon. To say nearly +2, that seems
crazy.
excessive.
And Magnus
way too
only
much.
needs a draw, but also look at the clock for Vladislav Artemiev. Down to 2 minutes. Is that enough to get that win that he needs?
He needs 10 minutes more, I feel. In order to put any pressure on white's position, you have to be super accurate, which computers are. Maybe that's why they see that black has an advantage. Their horizon is quite deep, and they always find the most incisive, most challenging moves. So maybe black does have an objective advantage, but with 2 minutes on the clock against a world champion who's an endgame expert, it's going to be hard to prove that. And white also doesn't have any weaknesses. That's maybe why we're most surprised. If you look at white's half of the board, he's controlled most of the squares there. Black still needs to do a bit of dancing around, a bit of organisation work in order to actually creep into white's half. So, it does feel like, OK, with this last move at least, creating a threat maybe, but Magnus stops that. Black was trying to push a pawn forward and the e-file to open up the centre to go for that white king in the middle, but Magnus trying to shut down that idea. OK, interesting.
Seemed very optimistic view from the computer, but just for me, because there's not many open lines, normally when an advantage is secure, it's because you've got some open lines and attack or some big gain in the position, which is very hard for a human to see. But it doesn't look like Vladislav is really finding any advantage at the moment with the way he's playing.
No, and this is the type of position where I can easily see a club player, for instance, taking a draw. Because they say, OK, well, you know, all the minor pieces are on the board. There's only one open line. Pawn structure is relatively similar. Why not? And but this type of position with all 4 minor pieces on the board, you get the idea of exchanging pieces. Like, when is it a good time to exchange? And this is something that Edson Mito asks. I would like to know what's the best time to exchange pieces in chess. I'm learning chess, and he's from Mozambique.
Nice.
And here we go, talking about exchanges. Here is one.
At least Black's trying to open it up, with this move, I guess.
He has to try something, right, in order to win this game. The moment was about to pass, so he's trying to open things up. Objectively, maybe nothing, but there we go. Some trades, and Black will maybe gain the bishop pair. To answer that question about exchanges, I remember, I think was it Yasser Serouane or was it Maurice Ashley who said it was the 2 Fs. You should go for exchanges if they're forced, or fantastic. There was another F as well, maybe. But either way, if the exchanges are forced, here Black is exchanging pieces because he's in a must-win situation. But usually a forced situation would be to stop checkmate, to maybe get rid of one of your opponent's strong pieces. Or if it's fantastic, where you trade off maybe your bad piece for your opponent's strong piece, then you go for trades. But don't go for exchanges just because you think it will guide you to safety. I think that's the key. Because often players spend 3 or 4 moves going for a trade, and actually they need those moves later on. So, exchanging pieces is actually one of the hardest things, or knowing when to is one of the hardest things in chess.
I guess you've got to see the potential in the pieces as well, because sometimes you can exchange off your piece for one of your opponent's pieces, but not realising that it can manoeuvre better than your opponent's pieces. So the long-term prospects of your pieces as well, I guess, is important. Yeah,
and talking of exchanges, Stockfish, now the computer, thinks that white only has 1 move to keep the balance, and that involves an exchange. And this is a good example, actually. White's best move is to use his dark square bishop and capture that black knight in the centre of the board. That's just a trade. Bishop and knight worth roughly the same, but black's knight is fantastic here. It's a great piece, threatening to jump in with a nasty check, threatening to jump in maybe to attack white's rook at the bottom of the board. It's just too strong a piece. So that's when to go for a trade, when your opponent has a piece that is too strong. And Magnus goes for it. That knight could not be allowed to survive. And now black has the bishop pair, but black does have a weak, isolated pawn in the centre of the board. So, we saw there the computer suggestions, Magnus finding the best move by far, but he can get there by process of elimination. And this exchange does allow as well the white knight to plant itself in the middle of the board later.
I guess it's just one trick, isn't there? In this position, after black recaptures with the bishop, you don't want to, OK, he's gone this way first, but you have to be careful when you plonk your knight into the centre of the board, as we'll see in a second.
So white will recapture that rook, most likely with his own rook. And knight jumping into the centre is not a good move yet. No. But you can just prepare that move. Shall we show this? Because it's the final, maybe critical moment in this game. White's knight wants to occupy this square, and he wants to plant it there over the next few turns. But if you do it now, after bishop takes, another trade, this is what I meant by forced or fantastic. This is fantastic for black, because everything's level. but there's a nasty follow-up. There's a check supported by this bishop, and this is actually a double attack. When the white king moves, the white bishop drops off, and black would be a piece up. That's why Magnus prepares this knight jump by just moving his rook forward. And everything's defended now for white. If black just takes a time out, for example, moves the king, now you can go for this knight jump, because after this exchange, after this trade, there's a check, but white's king can just move, and now the white rook defends everything. This would lead to a dead, drawn endgame. And talking of dead, drawn endgames, we're heading towards one, but Artemiev does have a trick in mind, and in this position, he traded off the white knight before it landed on that central square, and now, utilizing a pin on this file against the white king, he is attacking white's pawn in the middle here. But this shouldn't really be enough. White can just step this pawn forward, I think. And it's a bit ugly for white. After this trade, you do get left with an isolated pawn, which your bishop has to stay and defend, but everything else is balanced. If the rooks come off, it's simply a dead draw with opposite color bishops, just kind of passing each other, not making any effect on each other. And yeah, still some work for Magnus to be done, maybe.
Yeah, at least black can play this position on for a long, long time. Just trying to bring the king in that ending you said, and just try to make some improvements. But I can't imagine Magnus would ever lose that position.
Yeah.
So.
No, but the great thing about this position for Artemiev, and again, I've been a bit enthusiastic with my word great, is that, okay, you know, he's only got 1 minute on the clock, and it's the type of position where you can just make moves at tempo. You can make them quickly and build up that time, because 1 minute against Magnus's 8, that's going to be very difficult, actually. And it's an opposite color bishop end game. And we have a very interesting question from, hang on, let me bring up my document, from Kostas, who asks us, how many moves ahead does a super grandmaster normally count?
Oof, good question. It's far fewer than you would think. Yeah, I think in TV shows, in media, they always assume super grandmasters are working 20, 30 moves ahead. But it's never that way, really. It's normally maybe in 2 or 3 directions, it's 3 or 4 on average. But yeah, I don't think you need to calculate ahead in most positions. In endgames where every move really matters, then you look even further ahead. Or if every move is forced for both sides, it's easier to look into the distance. But if there are different branches, what's the point looking 10 moves ahead in one line when actually there are 3 or 4 other lines to look at as well? So I think grandmasters, the trick is they just know where to look. They know what direction to in.
Yeah,
Simon?
I think there's like a great way you can learn that skill as well, because that's obviously a very important skill to try and learn, just to visualization, you say, just being able to visualize how things turn up. And I'd say start with endings. A lot of people look at tactics when there's like loads of pieces on the board, but if you start by just king and pawn endings, it means you only have a couple of branches, possibilities that you should be analysing, so you can really visualise a long way ahead if there's not many pieces on the board. So if you get some king and pawn ending puzzles, and there's probably loads of literature out there you can do, it's a great way to improve your visualisation, rather than trying to calculate immensely complicated positions where there's hundreds of pieces on the board, because you'll just get confused, and you can add pieces on as you try to calculate. That's what I recommend you do if you want to improve your visualization.
Yeah, that's a great tip, because if, for example, you're doing knight endgames, it's just a knight and some pawns, you work out more about what the knight wants, where it wants to be, how flexible it is, and the knight's path, and then you add pieces as you master each. You master bishops, you master knights, and slowly from there
Sounds like a good book or course, that, doesn't it? Has anyone done that yet? That could be a good seller, that one. So yeah.
Yeah.
So you're the Chessable expert here, Simon.
Yeah, we get it done for Chessable.
And meanwhile, Magnus just relocating the white bishop. White's bishop actually stood terribly a few moves ago. Now it's a great piece. And no imbalances here, apart from white having an isolated pawn in the middle of the board, but it's well defended, and white's king active. I think this last move shows Artemiev knows he's not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And this one is fizzling out to a draw. If the rooks come off, Magnus is through to the final. It's going to be a draw.
I must admit, I actually thought that Magnus would offer a trade of rooks. I didn't expect him to push the pawn forward.
Yeah.
And Artemiev definitely trying, advancing some pawns. He is counting on the powerful dark square bishop he has in the middle of the board.
With 20 seconds?
The problem is now white's rook's on an open file, and black's rook is a bit blocked by the white bishop. And things are getting hot on the board. Also very warm in Magnus Carlsen's home office, as we're used to seeing by now. 26 degrees. Wow.
And
26.
Artemiev is under 10 seconds. Okay, he's just made his move.
Yep. Just shuffling the rook across doesn't really improve anything for black. Magnus can just put everything on light squares now, away from the eye line of the black bishop. And I don't see any plan, to be honest, for black, unfortunately. And Artemiev, he's just making moves, but he's down to 10, 20 seconds every time he moves now. It's going to be difficult to create anything for him.
He's got this h4 push at some stage to try to open up the range of his bishop. Well, he did until Magnus plays it first. And
Magnus shutting him down.
yeah.
And now the white rook can even jump into the position. I'm struggling to see how the black... There we go, the white rook does enter. Not threatening anything, but just showing that compared to the black rook, it is the more active piece.
Maybe can Artemiev kind of put all his hopes on creating a pass pawn against on the right side of the board? You know, he has a 3 versus 2 majority there.
Possibly, maybe long term, but it's difficult to arrange, and that would also require some help from Magnus. Magnus, meanwhile, just going after some black pawns, and he's going to try and repeat the position, the black bishop. Meanwhile, we've actually seen this position, but earlier it was black to play, now it's white to play. Just a bit of fun and games there.
Magnus got a sneaky threat. He wants to offer a trade of rooks and force those rooks off the board, which would be 100% draw.
Yeah, I mean, trying to win this position against the best endgame player of all time is a little tricky, right?
It's a big ask.
struggle.
It's an uphill struggle, so definitely.
Okay, the black rook trying to get active, but white shuts that down again with his bishop, and no progress to be made. Whatever black tries, white just says no.
Hang on, you could be a bit sneaky, right? Could you offer up 1 pawn? You could push the A pawn 1 square, and your whole idea is just to break.
Could have been
Could be a
captured.
draw. Could be a draw. It's a draw.
Yes, it could be.
Okay, we do see a result. Magnus is through to the finals.
He is. After only 3 games in this semi-final as well, Magnus winning game 1 and game 2 is ready for the first final in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour 2022.